Now, a school you have heard of before, Jeff, because I talk about it all the time, is Rutgers.
Oh, here we go. Go ahead.
I got a Rutgers man on the line here to join me today. Zubin Mehenti, how you doing today? Thank you so much for the time. We got you there, Zubin.
What's going on? How are you?
We are thrilled to have you. I said to Jeff, you're going to let me talk to a Rutgers guy on the phone. It's so exciting. I basically overlapped you. So your second year when you were calling games at Rutgers was the year that the football team was 0-11. That was my freshman year there. And I always joke with Jeff that was the year where they gave us tickets, transportation, and hot dogs and still couldn't get people to go to watch the football team play. It was an interesting time there. It's special to have you on because, to get a Rutgers guy on and talk, I rave all the time. Jeff's a Michigan man. You're also very excited for what's going on with the football team. Can you talk a little bit about your own love of Rutgers and your particular love of Coach Schiano, who's back now?
It's funny. We had Greg on our radio show, I would say, a week and a half ago. And it was one of those things where, as you probably know, it was more of a marriage of convenience. Coach Schiano probably unfairly couldn't get another job in FBS football after what happened, being associated unfairly, I think, with everything that went down at Penn State. Gene Smith, the athletic director at Ohio State, went out of his way to clear Greg Schiano. Urban Meyer said there was no issues. And as you saw, he tried to get the Tennessee job. That certainly didn't work out. And I think that there was probably only one job he was capable of getting, and that was the Rutgers job. And I think it's pretty fair that the Rutgers fan base only wanted one person to get the job, and that was Greg Schiano. And I think once all the politics cleared with Governor Murphy and former Governor Christie, and you just have to live in 2020. You have to be able to get private jets. You have to be able to build a facility. I think all the things that Coach Schiano was asking for are standard for big-time programs. I think a lot of people within the state of New Jersey thought they were a little bit exorbitant, but the bottom line is that's the price of doing business. I used to work in Iowa, and Bob Bowlesby, who's now the commissioner of the Big 12 Conference, he was Iowa's athletic director at the time, and I remember I interviewed him once before a huge game where Iowa played Michigan at the Big House, and I said to him, I said, how do you compete with Michigan? How do you compete with all these resources? And he looked me right in the face and said, the only thing worse than being in the college arms race is not being in the college arms race, right? So either you're going to get into this and be big boy football or you're not. I think it's great. Last thing I would tell you, you might remember 4 years ago, Michigan played Rutgers and Michigan won 78-0.
I was there.
This year the spread is 8 points, and it pains me to say this as a Rutgers grad, but the bottom line is over the last 4 years, they haven't been any better than they were in 2016. So the fact that they've gone from a 78-point margin to an 8-point game probably says a lot about Rutgers. It probably says a lot more about Michigan.
Zubin, not only was Jeff there, he was texting me regularly. And as an ESPN man, I know you'll understand this. I had alerts on for Rutgers scores. That was a really long afternoon of alerts and Jeff texting me about how well that game went for Michigan.
Well, to be fair, my text beat ESPN's alerts to you too. So, yes. Jason, I can't tell you how excited he was to have you on just in general, but also so that Rutgers would now be outmanning Michigan. What do you see, Zubin, with this team? What excites you about this Rutgers team?
I think the thing that excites me for sure, and I got nothing against Coach Ash. I think Coach Ash was just one of the latest in a group of guys, whether it's Terry Shea or whomever, to sort of walk into the situation and just simply not realize how difficult this job is. Every coach, fill in the blank coach, says, we're going to build a fence around the state. I mean, you can just, rinse and repeat, copy and paste that for every state university across the country. But I think until you really get to New Jersey, I don't think anybody that's from outside of the Garden State realizes just how tough that really is. I don't think there's any coincidence Coach is from New Jersey and he gets it. He's still got that pipeline down in Florida where he served with the Hurricanes and he's bringing some guys up. But I think he truly realizes not only does he have to probably fence the state off like everybody says, he actually has the ability to do it and realizes how hard it is. Just to your point, I mean, think about the 78-0, and then you think about Jabril Peppers getting out of New Jersey, and you think about Rashawn Gary getting out of New Jersey, and you think about both of those guys ending up at Michigan. So it's one of those things where I think they look just far more competitive. Look, I know Michigan State turned the ball over 7 times in that first game, and people were stunned, and Rutgers won that game. And they've been feisty in some of these games, for sure. I just think even though the win-loss record doesn't necessarily reflect it, I think I don't think you have to be a football guy. I sit next to Keyshawn Johnson every morning. I don't know as much about football as Key, but I think just my untrained eye can definitely say through the first few games of the second era of Schiano, they just look more crisp. They look more hungry. Even when the Indiana game was getting out of control, the Iowa State game was getting out of control, they're fighting, they're clawing, and they just look like a different group. Like I said, I don't think the record's going to reflect it right away, but I definitely feel like if you watch them, they feel like they're a lot more competitive out there. And that's all the fans want. In the modern era, Greg is probably the only coach that's truly had a great amount of success. You mentioned the 0-11 team that Terry Shea had. I mean, this is just a Rutgers thing, but if I'm not mistaken, the following year after the 0-11 year, they were 5-6, and Terry was the Big East Coach of the Year. Now, I understand that's a 5-game improvement. If you're telling me that a coach went 5-6 and that was good enough to garner Coach of the Year consideration, then what does that really say about the coach and the program? So I think Greg is the only guy they wanted, as I mentioned at the top. And like I said, I think it's going to take a while for the wins to get there. But I think the recruiting is obviously picking up. And for me, the fan base is back. Donations will be back. I think people were just down on the program. I grew up in New Jersey. And my entire life, I spent the first year of my professional working career in New Jersey, 23 years of my life in New Jersey. And for the large portion of that time, there was a tremendous amount of apathy around Rutgers football. It just didn't embolden the state the way that it does now. When Coach Schiano was on our program a week and a half ago, I told him, I said, man, when I was growing up, there were no billboards. There were no block R's on the back of cars. There was none of that stuff. There wasn't the pride in the program that there is now. So like I said, when you're a Rutgers fan, you take small wins, and you guys know this, the most important thing right now is to be in the Big Ten, right? Because once the musical chairs stop and the grant of rights gets lifted and they want to go to just 5 super conferences, right? The 5 power conferences break away and form a super conference. You don't want to be stuck in the Big East, which obviously doesn't play football these days. You don't want to be stuck in the AAC where Rutgers was for a small amount of time. Even if you're the 14th best team in a 14-team league, with all the TV money, the Big Ten network money, exposure on ESPN and Fox, you want to be in a major conference. You want to be, even if you're a bottom-rung team like a Maryland or a Rutgers and they join the league, haven't really made a ton of progress. When all the musical chairs stop and they basically say there's haves and have-nots, even though Rutgers has generally been a have-not, if they can get themselves into the have category, like being in the Big Ten, that's the most important thing for self-preservation in my mind.
You know, all three of us on this call are New Jersey people, and I think we all can say, we shake our heads that there's so much talent in the state of New Jersey that leaves it, and Rutgers always seems to be that school that everybody says has the ability to be a great program. And it's not just in football. It's basketball too. I don't know about you. I know that you covered basketball and you had a show called Nightline when you were at Rutgers. The RAC is one of the more underrated college arenas.
Well, I would tell you, I think for people that are too young for that, and I appreciate you mentioning that's almost 20 years ago, but for people that are too young for the RAC, if you watched the Rutgers basketball team last year, you probably saw how good the RAC can be. Now, they couldn't really win any games away from the RAC, but they practically won every single game at the RAC, and that was probably going to get them into the NCAA tournament for the first time since 1991. And the fact that they haven't been to the tournament since 1991 is really a mind-blowing situation when you think about the fact that all you really have to have is one player to lift you to the NCAA tournament. The fact that they haven't been there since 91 and probably would have made it last year for Coach Peichel does say something. So you're right. But we were talking about this. After Coach Schiano hung up, I was talking to Key, because, you know, USC, where he went, is used to getting everybody that they want. But think about this. Just think about the possible all-time New Jersey team. I'm just making this up off the top of my head, and I realize Rutgers can't get all these players. But, you know, Theismann would be your quarterback from New Jersey. Ron Dane, who I think is the best running back of his generation in college football. I had a chance to cover him with the Denver Broncos when I worked in Denver. He was from New Jersey. Mike Rozier, the great Nebraska running back, is from New Jersey. Dwayne Jarrett, the great USC wide receiver, was from New Jersey. Greg Olson, the tight end who got hurt last night, he's from New Jersey. And then you go to basketball. Look, my other partner on the air, fellas, is Jay Williams, right? I mean, the guy's from Metuchen. Dante Jones played in the Colonial Valley Conference, which is the high school league where I went. I went to Hightstown High School in East Windsor. He started at Rutgers, went to Duke. I remember my first professional job, one of my first assignments was to cover DeJuan Wagner, who is a stud at Camden High School. I used to work in South Jersey in my first job. And now I'm old enough for DeJuan Wagner's got a kid, DeJuan Wagner Jr., another guy from New Jersey. I believe you remember Troy Murphy, lefty that went to Notre Dame. He was from New Jersey. So there are so many dudes. You are right, not just in football, but in basketball. And other than Dante Jones briefly going to Rutgers and then transferring to Duke, Tim Thomas was another really big one, Patterson Catholic, when I was in high school from 1992 to 1996. None of these guys, he ended up going to Villanova. They just have not been able to grab any of these guys, and you just really Luol Deng. I mean, the list could just go on and on.
Jason's crying over here.
Sorry to bring up all these bad memories, but these are just facts. I just deal in facts, even though now I talk in the radio, so they say, don't worry, just do informed speculation. But I used to do SportsCenter for a long time. It was facts. But I will tell you, think about just all those names and the fact that they missed out on almost every single one of them.
Well, and I mean, I'm going to try not to cry over the names, but some of the names you mentioned are the guys you get to work with now, Jay Williams and Keyshawn. How special is it for you to have this show now? And, you know, you go from SportsCenter, all the stuff that you did through the years, Iowa, Denver, everything, working in South Jersey. Now here you are on the big stage, having done SportsCenter and now being with JWill and Keyshawn, who probably not better guys who know their sports than those two. What's that like for you?
Yeah, my job is just to get the best out of them. See, for me, it's one of those things where, you know, every once in a while I'll throw my opinion in, maybe be the conduit of the fans. So if you're listening to our show and they're saying something crazy, I got to step in there and be like, fellas, hang on a second. What are we talking about here? So I kind of play the role of the fan because the majority of people listening to the show are fans. They're obviously 1%ers in their sports, but the most of us could just wish we could run out of the tunnel one day at the Rose Bowl or slip on a Duke jersey for one night. I mean, that's been their life. We're just trying to live that for one night. And if I can be the person or the conduit for the fan, I like to do it. I think the biggest difference for me is when you're working at night, when you're doing SportsCenter and you're doing all these games. And it was really a thrill to, you know, sit next to Kenny Mayne and Linda Cohn and John Anderson and Steve Levy and all these people I grew up watching and now call them colleagues is amazing. But after a game is over, you guys know, like after a game's over that you're finished watching, whether it's at your house, at a bar, you're over your friend's house, like it's hyped. I mean, you are hyped up, especially after your team wins. You don't have to manufacture any energy to get on a text chain to watch the post-game show, et cetera. But in the morning, it's a little bit different because you do have to manufacture the energy. The game's been over for probably 7 hours or so. Half your audience, if they're joining you at 6 o'clock in the morning, probably fell asleep midway through the third quarter. So they may not have seen the game because they got to get up and go to work. And we're fortunate enough that this is work. But it's one of those things where the dynamic's a little bit different. After the game, there's so much adrenaline. There's so much blood flowing. It's great. The energy's there. Difference is in the morning, you've got to kind of create that energy. So that's something I'm kind of getting used to a little bit, from having that natural high of the game is over. Where are we going? What are we doing? Who are we talking to? Where are the press conferences? Where are the context? What are the stats? What should we tell the viewers? Are we going to go 40 minutes without a commercial break? Are we going to take one right now so when we come back, we could go full bore? All those decisions, flying by the seat of your pants. I love all that stuff. I love that. This is a little bit more get prepared, sit there, go from A to B to C to D, because we've got 7 hours to put it all together. So totally different dynamic. I got to be honest with you, I kind of prefer the former one. I kind of like the energy, but this is just a great opportunity to really be the first word on ESPN every morning, and there's some value in that.
Well, we can't wait to keep listening to this show. We would love to have you back on again to talk more. I'll get to pick your brain on Rutgers, everything else about that. But we encourage everybody to give you guys a listen in the morning. And congratulations on the success you're having. It's been really fun to watch your rise, and we can't wait to see where you go next.
Oh, appreciate you guys having me. Call me anytime.